G'day, and I mean that ironically, as I review this quintessentially Australian book, I would say, Servo by David Goodwin. So this book was a present, thank you very much, I did enjoy it. It is a very funny book, and it's meant to be funny. David Goodwin is a Melburnian, and at the time when he was at uni, he was poor, he needed money, so he applied for a job at a Servo. I think that's a gas station in either America or England, or possibly both. But basically, it's a place where you go to get fuel, if you're Australian, gas, if you're American, for your car. But in Australia, they are much more. As Goodwin points out, they are quintessentially Australian. They are an experience that many Australians have had. And like many young Australians with no referees, no previous job experience, he fell into the retail trap, and more especially into the graveyard retail trap of servos. Now, I myself am not a Melburnian, but my mother was. I lived in Melbourne for a number of years, some time before David Goodwin talks about. But essentially in the wee hours, like 2 to 4 a.m, nothing is open except servos. So if you need milk, or if you've just come from a club and you need a soft drink, or if you need fuel on your way to work, all these people default to servos. I agree with him that it is very much an Australian experience. He says servo work is popular. Everyone seems to know someone who's worked in these halogen parlours of forced smiles and expensive superfluous crap. Servos are an unmistakable piece of Aussie life. Unmistakable piece of Aussie life. A part of who we are, like sunburn, backyard cricket, and tall poppy syndrome. He's very good at ticking all the different boxes and different parts of Australia, and he does it humorously. And that is basically what this book is. It's very, very funny. I think, in my mind, I couldn't help... I don't read a lot of humour. In my mind, I couldn't help comparing it to He Died with a Falafel in His Hand, a book that just appeared on my doorstep mysteriously the other day, incidentally. Thank you, whoever sent it. And it also reminded me of Don't Tell My Mother I Work on the Rigs, She Thinks I'm Playing Piano in a Whorehouse, or something like that. Funny books that are about real life and are written in such a way to cast amusement over the experience. So, I really enjoyed it, overall. I've read a few other reviews from other people on Goodreads, and I find that a lot of people give it 2 stars and didn't finish it. And actually, that was my initial experience. I started reading it. I was delighted with the humour. I was delighted with the language. And I will still say that this is a beautifully edited book. It's well written. I enjoy the language. I love his stories. But the editing is sparklingly spectacular compared to many modern books that don't even seem to have had a proofreader. This is a Hachette imprint. I don't know if it's Hachette or David Goodwin that produced this marvel of good editing and good grammar, and intense Australian slang. But yeah, I was really impressed by that. The people who didn't finish it say that while initially they enjoyed it, it seemed to be repetitive and the humour didn't really say anything new. And that happened to me a little bit. I started reading it, I loved it. I read it up to a point, maybe a quarter through, and then I stopped. I found myself losing interest because I too found it a bit repetitive, and because I was about to travel, and like most modern books, it's the size of a gravestone, it's heavy as, and it was too much to travel with, which is why generally I tend to prefer paperbacks. When I got back from my travels, there was Servo with its little bookmark sitting there taunting me. And I eventually picked it up and kept on reading it. And I kept on reading it with a sense of restored delight. It does change over time. If you're one of those people who's considering stopping reading around the quarter mark, it does change. It follows David's experience. Over the 6 years he works in the Servo, he starts off a newbie, fresh and unguarded on the shores of a Servo graveyard shift. He then becomes hardened and angry. he goes through a few things. He discovered drugs, and I have to say that dragged on a little bit for me. I get that drugs are a very important milestone in the evolution of many young people. I think David's exploration of the experience, while it was often very insightful and certainly gave me insight into things like MDMA, which I haven't had, and into the more modern drug culture and the way it works with festivals, again, experiences I haven't had, it did go on a bit. He then discovers meditation and yoga to take the anger off his seething graveyard servo performance, and that's interesting as well. And it ends when he finally says goodbye to the servo and moves on with his life, into his life as an author, which is probably a lot better for him. So, yeah, if you're considering stopping reading, I'd say keep reading, or maybe put it down for a week or two, read something else, and then come back to it. I think it's definitely worth it. It would also be a very good aeroplane book because of its bite-sized experiences. So there's pros and cons to it, obviously. The pros are that it's very funny. It's at times emotional, or at least visceral. It's well written. It's beautifully edited, as I said. It's from the heart. And the personal experience very much comes through. The cons for me are that the humour is relentless, especially at the beginning. And I don't read that much comedy humour. So it has to be something you like, that type of writing, or you're really in the mood for. And eventually I was really in the mood for it, and I did enjoy it. I think some of the people who didn't finish it, probably it's not the first choice of types of reading. Another thing that isn't really a con and isn't really a pro, but it's just a really solid thing, is it's Australian. It is very, very Australian. If you are not Australian, I suspect there is a lot in here you won't get. The references are colloquial, they're local, and they are gonna be tough for anyone who isn't Australian. So if you say to an Australian a VN Commodore or a Holden Commodore, an Australian instantly gets this whole history, image and knowledge about whereof you speak. And while David does explain the VN Commodore and the culture and what some of the expectations you may have about people driving it, stereotyping to the max, it's not going to be instantly apparent to a non-Australian. It isn't going to say the same thing. The language isn't one that is necessarily going to be something you grok. And while some of the terms are explained, especially the more important ones, like said Commodore, many of them you're just going to have to trail along and do your best. I think even if you are one of those people who really love Australia and you do your best to stay up with the slang, and you do in fact know what a dunny means, that's not going to help you here because the slang is modern. The patterns of speech are modern. They are an Australia that doesn't appear in little penguin guidebooks of slang. That's what I'm saying. However, I'm sure many non-Australians will enjoy it. They probably won't get all of it. Now, whether you're Australian or not, if you've ever worked in retail with entitled customers, and if you've ever done graveyard shifts with batshit crazy customers, then you will find a lot to love here. He describes the things that keep you going, which are basically sugar and caffeine. I've worked a few graveyard shifts in my time. They're not in retail. The weirdness of the customers, and it is often uproariously funny. So the writing style is what you'd expect from someone who likes literature. It's complex, and he enjoys the complexities of the English language. He likes words that are complex and niche, as well as he likes slang, and I think a few people don't like it on that basis. It may not suit every reader who just wants an easy laugh but doesn't want to engage with the literature. This book took me a while to read, and it was a fun experience, but still a while to read. I do believe there's also an audiobook where the reader has got an excellent Australian accent, though I've heard the comment that he does all females pretty much alike. I think, yeah, I think that's pretty much all I've got to say. It's a good book. It's often very funny. It's almost always very well written. It can get a bit repetitious at times, and it will occasionally need a bit of a break. But I'm going to read you a bit. You're going to see if you like this style of literature or not. So this is on page 101. Servos may not be the most desirable of places to frequent, but why do they pulse with such an undercurrent of rage? In how many other retail jobs are you separated from your customers by a cage, forced to wear a duress pendant at all times, and have the cops on speed dial? At times I felt like I was in a shark cage, bobbing in the ocean as the white pointers gnashed their teeth and sailed past me with dead black eyes. I'd survived the job for a year when I really started coming face to face with rage consistently. Looking back, it was, funnily enough, around the time when the price of a barrel of oil rose dramatically, as full tanks turned from $60 into $90, then over the sacred $100 mark. The sneers and choice comments grew. War was being declared by customers on the only focal point they could identify, the humble console operator. Yeah, so a lot of fun. I would recommend it to Australians, especially ones who know what 2 a.m. looks like when they're being paid for it, and probably not being paid enough. I would say consider it carefully for non-Australians, but if you like humour, you'll probably find a lot to enjoy here. Thank you very much for watching. It was a rather all over the place review, but that's probably because I finished work at 11 o'clock last night. So, graveyard shifts. Who doesn't love them?